Hey everybody, David Michael Phelps here. Our guest today on Working Man is Cal Schroder. Cal is a husband, a father, an electrician, and a graduate of Thomas More College. If you want to understand how an integrated human life requires both the work of your hands and the work of the mind, Cal's the guy to talk to. In this episode, we talk about Cal's journey from a liberal arts education to a career in the trades, why discounting the trades and romanticizing them are equal and opposite errors, why work and leisure are not exactly opposites, and what Greek philosophy has to do with running conduit in an apartment building. Cal's a thoughtful guy with a real balanced and nuanced view of the good life, and I think you're going to like this one. So without further ado, here's Cal Schroder.
I'm Cal Schroder. I'm an electrical apprentice working for probably about a middle-sized contracting company in the Grand Rapids area. I'm a tradesman. I should give a full disclosure. I still have about another year before I can test for my journeyman's license, so I'm technically an apprentice still.
Well, I think there's more to that. The way I've heard you described is part electrician, part philosopher.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Brian was being very generous there. I think what he meant was I have a liberal arts background, so I went to Thomas More College of Liberal Arts for 4 years. So I do have that background, and I know a lot of people when they hear liberal arts aren't really sure what that means, and so that really comes down, at least the way it's pursued at Thomas More, to kind of a mix of history, philosophy, and literature, but done through the primary texts in a chronological order in the humanities section. So, your freshman year, you're working through Romans and Greeks, then progressing to early medieval, late medieval, early modern. And as I said, you're seeing it as much as you can, I think, through the eyes of the people that are living that, because you're reading the primary documents. You're not reading the textbooks, which is to say, so when you come to, let's pick an example of the American founding, you're reading, the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, or, notes from the Constitutional Convention. I did enjoy my studies and continue to enjoy studies on my own in that regard.
So let me ask you this question, because this is a question that, Harmel elicits from a lot of people too, and I think you're in a unique position to help answer it, which is what does all of that have to do with the trades? I mean, I think in most people's minds, some sort of study of the humanities and some sort of life of work in the trades seem to be alien to one another. Do you think that's the case?
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that's certainly the opinion today. And it's unfortunate because you really divorce the practical from the theoretical, how you live from what you do daily, and that doesn't need to be the case. But you're right. I think in a lot of people's minds that is.
You strike me as someone who, having gone to Thomas More, which is a very sort of robust classical education. And now you're an electrician. So you're in a unique position to be able to speak to what those things have to do with one another in a particular man's life, right? Not in sort of, we can opine a lot about abstractly how does the life of studying how to be human and how to work, obviously they have a lot of overlap, and not just overlap, they're integrally tied. But for you, when you are running miles of cable through a conduit in an apartment building, right?
Yeah.
What does Athens have to do with conduit?
So for myself, I think the most fundamental thing is it's an integrated person. You don't think with one part of your brain and then another part of your brain. You do it as a whole person. And so if you're only thinking of yourself as a cog, as I'm just the lever, I'm just the thing that's pulling the wire in the conduit, as per the example you just gave, and you've separated that from everything else you do in life, it's going to get very hollow very quickly. And I think boredom is a typical experience. But I think part of the reason that is because we've learned to see ourselves, kind of compartmentalize our life to such an extent that we only see ourselves in position A, B, and C, and you never see the person that's behind all those different roles. And I think, at least for myself, what Thomas More did was help to integrate those things. I went there for the curriculum. I had actually never visited it before I showed up on campus. And I know those first couple of days, I was like, oh my goodness, what I get myself into. But one of the things I came to appreciate, and I think it's a result of not only the curriculum, but how it is taught there and how it is lived there, is the sense of community and the sense of unity and purpose that comes from that. So if I could boil it down to the basic, what do those two have to do with each other? Well, they're both parts of what should be your pursuit of the good life, of a virtuous life. And that's at work, that's at home, that's wherever you are, whatever you're pursuing, you should be pursuing excellence in whatever capacity that is. And for myself, I think my electrical experience would be I think more empty if I didn't have that, I guess, deposit to fall back on. That understanding that life is richer than maybe this menial task at the moment. This menial task has a purpose in the bigger project, and that bigger project itself is just one part of this practice of the good life. Am I answering what you're asking? I don't get asked this too often to connect these two. It's just kind of just how I go through life.
Well, I think that's it right there, right? Is that we don't reflect on that enough, I think. And I think that's probably true for working fellas, especially, that, thinking through the deep meaningfulness of what seems to be something menial. I mean, it's not practical in the moment, right? I mean, when you're working in a shop and you're working on a Bridgeport, for example, right? You probably don't have time, and it probably wouldn't be helpful at that moment to spend a lot of time daydreaming about the philosophical import of putting this new bit in the Bridgeport or whatever, right? And so it's I'm not suggesting that people should or even that it's good, but the fact remains that the link between work, and particularly physical work, and that excellent life, there is a very important one, and it gets kind of short shrift, I think, in people's thinking about the good life. For example, anyone who thinks about economics, mm-hmm. I don't know a lot of economists who make their living in the trades, for example, right? Which is funny if you think about it, right? An economist is right. An economist is someone who studies how work works, but how many of them have a great deal of practical experience in the mm-hmm. trades? Very few. So anyway, the point is that there's not a lot of attention paid to it, but that isn't to say there isn't fruit to be born from that reflection. Well, how did you start? How did you find yourself pursuing a life as an electrician? That I think some people would be surprised to say, oh, I'm going to go spend 4 years studying liberal arts and then move into the trades. How did that happen for you?
I think the best place for that to begin would be during my high school, towards the end of my high school career. I'd been working for a few years in a local hardware store, which is not itself obviously a trade, but you come into a lot of contact with tradesmen or handymen. And for me at that time, I really enjoyed that experience. And so when I got to the end of high school, I was interested in, it was one of the options floating around in the back of my head about pursuing a trade. I didn't even know what kind of trade. I just know that I wanted to try it. And I say, unfortunately, kind of qualified here because I did have the good fortune to go to a very good school, as a public school in the area. But it was very much kind of a college prep institution, which was great. I had great classmates focused on their studies, great instructors. But there wasn't a lot of electives as far as shop would be concerned, as far as trade skills are concerned. And so without those skills and without knowing anyone personally that was in the trades, it was very difficult for me to kind of understand, okay, how would I make that transition? And at the same time, I was still, because I was in that situation, still very much the mindset was, okay, go to college, get your degree. So I went to a large state school for a year. I had a fine time. Didn't dislike it. I just wasn't feeling fulfilled. And so at that point, I transferred to Thomas More. I had a wonderful 4 years there. And towards the end of it, of course, you get out of your school and you're pushed back to the same question. Okay, so what are you going to do after now? And so what was funny to me is that even after the 4 years of those liberal arts education, I still had this desire to pursue the trades. And I think what it was for me at that time was a desire to work with my hands, to know how to work with my hands. I can't speak to everyone else's experience, but I know, you spend 12 years of your life at a desk, and at least for myself, you get to the end of it and you can recite all these facts. You can give a breakdown of historical processes. You maybe explain what's going on in your chemistry lab, but then something breaks in your house and you don't have any idea how to fix it, and it's kind of drains the confidence from you. And I knew I wanted that. That was something that I wanted to be able to handle problems that occurred. But at school, I had not really gotten above the theoretical or beyond the theoretical. So there was still a very much a desire to work with my hands and to learn how to do that. So as senior year of college rolled around, I was thinking about different grad schools, but I still had that kicking around in the back of my head. And so thankfully, I bumped into Brian, and had the good fortune. I can't even remember what caused it. I think there was a storm at school, and we ended up talking because he was there to pick up one of his daughters, I think. And we just ended up talking for probably a good hour or so about the trades. And I had mentioned my interest in them, and he said, "Well, if you're, something to the effect of, if you're interested, let me know. Like I know a couple of people in the trade." So, and so I thought about it a little more, and then I asked him, and he put in a word for me and made the introduction to the company where I'm working now. So that's kind of how I got to where I am at the moment.
So how long have you been there?
Coming up on 3 years.
3 years. And in that 3 years, in working with your hands, have you I guess found what you were looking for in addressing a move from something purely theoretical and abstract to something concrete?
Yes, there's certainly that, and I would add two things. There is that. There is you'll never get away from it, especially as an apprentice. There is a lot of time that is basic chores or tasks. So it's not like every day is this wonderful, wide-eyed experience where you're learning something that you'd never seen before. But then I would also say it also brings about an awareness of how much you still don't know. So I've been at it 3 years, and I definitely, I can say that I feel more competent, more confident in what I'm doing, or, when something breaks in one of my friend's apartments, or something, not even a friend, a neighbor, you start taking on side jobs or helping guide with side jobs, and you see all the different kinds of work that that you still don't know about. But I think there's it's an effect that builds upon itself, that once you start to put yourself in a situation where you say, I don't know this, but I know I have these skills, and I can come out of this better for it. I'm not going to know every single variable when I go into this project, but I know I can get through it.
What I hear you saying is that you may not have a map to every problem, but you've got the basic cartography skills to map out your journey forward.
Yeah, I would say that sums it up pretty well.
What's been the biggest surprise moving into the trades for you?
That's a good question. I went in so much of a blank tablet that I didn't really have expectations. I guess for me, one of the things I've learned is that how much your employer affects what you learn as far as where they're focused. So and I guess this is what I mean is I would expect it's similar for other trades, certainly for electrical. You have residential, commercial, and industrial. And depending on where your employer focuses their energies, you're going to learn, even within the same trade, a whole set of skills that other parts of the same trade might not use. So your industrial engineer is going to be doing stuff every day that your residential will never come upon, and vice versa. And so I guess it's not correct to say there's trades within trades, but the idea of how big the trade was, I think, is what surprised me. Is, I'm going to be an electrician. Yeah, all electricians do the same thing. No, they don't. It's very, very different depending on where you're spending your time. So I think that was one of the big things for me.
What has been the thing you've learned to become most grateful for?
For my experience personally, and this is the human element, is the people that I work for and with. I've been very blessed, have been, for the most part, a group of really solid guys, really, really good men. And that doesn't mean necessarily that they're Catholic or practicing by any means, but just when you get into the trades, you can come across quite a few rough characters. And I've just been really grateful for people who have very different personalities, very different backgrounds, but just really impressed by the number of people I've come across that, whatever their backgrounds, care about what they're doing, care about their trade, about their tradesmanship, and care about you learning the craft well, which was good. And I know from when you're required to take classes for your apprenticeship, and when you're in class, you're with a bunch of other apprentices who are from, obviously, many different companies, and I know that's not the experience of everyone. So I've been grateful for that.
So you and I are, of different generations. When I grew up working for my father in his machine shop, and for my generation, the message we got from the schooling system and from society generally was, there's no future there. If you want to do anything, if you want to have any hope of being able to have a good life or attain that, golden status we call employable. Mm-hmm. The only way to do that is, head off to college, get your 4-year degree. That's the road forward. And the sense was that, the life of the trades, or in our case, manufacturing or industry, that was going away. And there's a sense in which that was true. There was certainly a space where so much manufacturing was offshored. But, now, many years later, people are realizing, oh no, we have basically just convinced an entire generation of tradesmen not to show up to work. And now there's this enormous need. As someone who is of the generation starting to respond to that need, what would you say to people who might still have that mindset that somehow the trades is not a path towards the good life? There's the residual belief, there's this residual bias against that. But as someone, as a part of that generation who's responding, what do you say to someone that might have that bias?
I don't know what to say other than it's just not so. And you're right. There's that. I think I like that phrase you had, that residual bias. Even when I was thinking about getting into this, the irony is I was speaking to family members that were in the trades, and they were telling me, I don't know if you want to do this. You should think about going to this other job. You have that college degree. And it was surprising for me, because that was one of the few places I thought, okay, this person's going to, they get it. But yeah, I'm not sure how to correct that bias other than demonstrating to people by the very, very fact of doing it that's not the case. There is this kind of latent idea still in a lot of people's minds that, the trades are good, but if you can do something else, that would be better. This idea that if you're in the trades, you've obviously fallen to the trades, rather than choosing to pursue that of your own accord. The good thing I would say is a lot of tradesmen are aware of that, and I think that's one of the reasons you see them take their jobs as seriously as they do. They understand that there's kind of this prejudice And certainly, I mean, not everyone lives up to that, but I think there is an awareness of that. And I think the way to correct it is get to know more tradesmen and you'll start realizing that it's not the case.
Yeah, that seems like a wise path because there's an opposite sort of error that you can make in responding to that, which is in a sense overly romanticizing the trades by painting a picture of the trades that is that forgets that it's also hard and dirty at times, right? And
Yes.
where the reality is that the concrete lived experience of that life defies both the residual bias that it's somehow not meaningful worth and defies the sort of romanticization at the same time. So getting to know actual tradesmen, you're going to run smack dab into the concrete realities of the truth of things. And I think because there are fewer of them these days, people are less likely to know and run into that life and be able to see the truth of it, which is that it's good, meaningful work. And by the way, it's also an excellent career path these days because it's in such demand, but it's also an excellent avenue for the good life. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's equally true and that's unfortunate as well that I do hear that myself, when people start to speak of it sometimes. And yeah, it's hard work. I mean, it's work.
So tell me, you used this phrase earlier on, the phrase, the good life. What is that? What do you mean by that?
I'm gonna speak about it how I came upon it. That's the easiest way for me to approach it. So I started to say I went to Thomas More for the curriculum, and one of the things I wasn't expecting that I really appreciated after my 4 years there was not necessarily the curriculum, but the sense of the community. I mean, I did appreciate all my classes, but there was something I went there and didn't expect to come away with. And it was this idea that, this lived experience that here is a place where, for lack of a better way to phrase it, like people know how to be human that we've forgotten. I had classmates around me that were, and it wasn't some dusty, dry, book or speech about pursuing virtue, but they're actively trying to be virtuous people, and they would talk to you about it. But then not only that, in your off time, when you're not doing your homework or you're not doing your readings for the class or preparing something else for your work, people they'd sit out on the lawn, they'd play music. We had campfires. It was just just the pace and the dynamic. To me, at least, I had never experienced that before. The idea of a small community united around this pursuit of wisdom, because it was a academic community. But I think for me, it was good to even be aware that was a possibility, because the danger is I would have gone through life not even realizing what you were missing. And so relating that to work, it was this understanding that you work in order to live. You don't live in order to work. And so the understanding that this is a means to an end, and I should not, because this is another danger, is to turn work into the kind of the default position. The idea of if I'm not working, I'm not doing something worth doing. Or if I'm not being useful, I'm not doing something worth doing. And for me, the good life, or my introduction to that, was realizing work is there. It's a good thing. It's there to serve higher things. And so even if you're doing that menial task, even if you don't see the purpose, it's there because it's providing you a means to pursue better things.
I think that's exactly right. You've identified another danger here too, which is when you don't have a solid understanding of what work is, why it's important, how it fits into an integrated life that's in pursuit of something excellent. When you don't have that sort of thing and you start to discover it, one of the results can be that you start to overestimate its role in the good life. And you can say all there is work. You wrote an article for Harmel some weeks ago about leisure, and I could sense you pulling on Josef Pieper quite a bit there, right?
Yep.
Why don't you
Yep.
say a little bit about the relationship between work and leisure? Are those things opposites?
In a way, yes, because one is done for the sake of something else, and one is not. There's a clear distinction there. But I don't think it's opposites, and this is the danger is you can't even get people to think outside these categories anymore. It's not the opposite in the sense of leisure is the lack of work. Leisure is the absence of work, because there are other things that fill that. And I think that's what one of Pieper's key ideas that runs through most of his writing is that we can't even think outside the terms of work anymore. I think he calls it the totalitarian work state. Is there's work and then there's rest, and rest is defined as not work. And so leisure is the pursuit of things done for them for their own end. There are just certain activities that we do just because we want to do them. And I think I used the example in that article of, just play it out in your daily life. I go to work and just keep asking why do I go to work? I go to work to make money. Okay, why do I make money? So I can, pay for these things. Well, why do I pay for these things? So I can have, the necessities for life. But eventually, if you follow this out long enough, for any practical action, you should come to an end where you can't just ask why anymore, and you say, well, just because that thing's desirable, because that's worth having. And by definition, therefore, that thing's not useful. It's just an end in itself. It can't be used for anything else. That's just what you're pursuing. So I think, I do think it's important for people to really grasp that today, because it clarifies a lot of other problems in the moral life. At least it did for me. My German blood would have had me, if I hadn't run across that idea, it would have just had me, the stereotypical, you work, and that's what's good. And if you're not, you're just idle. So I think that did a lot to temper that mentality that I have, that I had. I mean, this is really connected. It's not really a separate aspect of the moral life, but I mean, so then you see that start to play through in other things. You start asking yourself, okay, so if I don't need to do that every day, like how should I be applying this principle, in life? Okay, maybe I shouldn't feel ashamed to, set work aside. So here's another good example, of things we've been talking about, avoiding different excesses, one end of the spectrum and the other, and you're shooting for the mean. You don't want to romanticize work, but you don't want to downplay its dignity. Well, another example when that comes to work is I should say, want to be the person that, goes home and watches Netflix for, 5 hours or binges something, consistently throughout the week. At the same time, I think there's this mentality, but if I go home and I, work on this project, or, go to another job, or, as long as I'm doing something productive, then I'm avoiding that. But the truth is you run to the other excess. And so the truth, what you should be aiming for is to not go home and just become a vegetable, nor to go home and think if you're going to be doing something worthy or good, you have to be active. You have to be, producing something. It's all right to put things down, sit there and just be silent, especially in this, the current situation we have where everyone's trapped in their homes now. You don't have to be ashamed about not doing something. That can be a moment of quiet. That can be a moment of peace. You can sit down and, pick up an instrument if you know how to play. You don't have to feel guilty about that. And that's more my side. I know my habits. I tend more to I have to be doing something.
So you mentioned earlier about finding this community of people interested in learning about and practicing the good life when you were in school, and how important that was to you. Now that you are a working man, what does it look like to find similar types of community that is aiming at the same sort of pursuit of the good life and the pursuit of a virtuous life?
Yeah, that is a really difficult one, I think, just because, and I say so take the hypothetical, if I hadn't gone to Thomas More, I wouldn't have even known what that looked like or what I was missing. And so once you go, I almost want to say back out into the world, how do you find communities like that? Especially because quite a few people don't seem to be aware that's even something that could be. For me, at least, it's always been connected to a parish. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in the parish, but the people I've got to know have been through the parish and through different opportunities that the parish offers. One friend I thought was this fantastic idea that we were doing for a while. It was about every other week we'd have a potluck, but someone else would host it. And, if you could make it, then bring something. And if you couldn't, then, no worries. You'd make it to the next one if you wanted. So, I mean, that's one concrete way. But I do think that's, it is difficult just because we've lost, I think were certain institutions or limits in place that would have directed us to a sense of community in previous ages that just aren't there anymore. And so it's something that we should come to naturally, but now we have to almost look for it and try to shore it up, try to find places to establish it. And for me, being a young man, I mean, I still consider myself young. So it's one of the challenges I have to come to is, all right, how do I find a place to not only take care of my own family, but, we're a community of families. How do we help to nourish each other? And I think it's forming different institutions. At least that's the answer I see right now. So forming institutions like Harmel that are united around a purpose, and that purpose itself is centered on God. So whether it's explicitly a parish or some group within a parish, or whether it's institutions like a trade school, there are many options.
Hey folks, just jumping in real quick to tell you that Working Man is sponsored by Harmel Academy of the Trades, a brand spanking new residential Catholic trade academy in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Listen, we should all want to be like Jesus and do all we can do to be like him. And well, I'm not saying that since Jesus was a tradesman, you should consider being a tradesman too. I'm also not saying that. But all kidding aside, if you are a Catholic man trying to figure out what life has in store for you, consider whether a career in the trades would be a good fit. At Harmel Academy, you will be trained in a high-demand skilled trade while being formed in your Catholic faith. You'll live, eat, work, study, and pray with a cohort of other Catholic men, and you'll learn how human work is a key path to encountering God in your daily life. We're now accepting applications for our inaugural class, so if you're looking for a new adventure, check us out at harmelacademy.org and apply soon. Now, back to the interview. It sounds to me, though, like in your description of finding that balanced life between work and leisure, and in finding the sorts of communities that support that type of virtuous development, what's operative in both of them is a type of intentionality. I mean, you have to go after it purposefully. Do you think that there's anything about your life as a working man that strengthens that type of intentionality, that sort of focus on building something that is good?
Yes, I think, and I think I do appreciate that phrase. That's a good word for it, intentionality. And I do think as a working man, that is there. If, as you mentioned earlier, you were using the example, you can't be daydreaming about Athens when you're pulling wire through conduit, or if you do, things go wrong. A lot of times we have these wishes that, I would love to have a community more like this, but I can't do that here for reasons X, Y, and Z. And I think the craftsman, the tradesman mentality is much more, okay, what's the problem? Okay, what do you have to work with, and how can we make that work? What are your materials? What are your skills? And let's see if we can get a solution to the problem you have here. And so I do think there is that spirit that in a time where you have to actually create community in a way, or set up institutions, or create places where it can flourish. I think that mentality that comes from being a tradesman, that habit of not being daunted, but just facing the problem head on and saying, these are my materials. Here's what I have to work with. Here's how I'm going forward. So I think that mentality, and at least most of the tradesmen I've encountered and work with have that mentality of you don't overcomplicate the problem, and you don't make it sound like it can't be solved. You solve it.
Hey, thanks everyone for listening. If you know someone interested in the sort of conversations we have here on Working Man, I hope you'll share this podcast with them. And if you can take a short moment to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, it really would help us out. And if you're not following us yet on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, what are you waiting for? We promise we will never clog your feed with cat memes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.